I'm looking over the questions you sent me.
G'day mate, 40 here. Welcome to 40 University. Got a real life academic, someone who got her PhD. Unlike 40, I didn't even graduate with my BA, but I love the world of academia because my father got 2 PhDs, so I love the life of the mind. And you, Dr. Lisa Munro, you wrote an essay that affected a lot of people. So I just want to read a few paragraphs from this essay. You wrote it in 2017, I believe. I've been out of academia for 2 years, having finished my PhD in 2015. I think I'm finally on the road to healing. I often joke that leaving academia feels like the worst breakup ever, except that I'm not joking. Giving up on something you thought was your life's calling hurts like hell when you experience rejection from the entire industry of academia after devoting years of your life and thousands of dollars to become an academic. Betrayal and rage sometimes become your only emotions for a good long while. So it's now about 4 years since you published this. What does it feel like to have these words read back to you?
And hello, and thank you so much for doing this with me. I'm so excited to do your show.
Thank you.
I think I'm a little bit, so there's a lot of quit lit. Like a lot of academics, when they leave academia, they write these, and people have done it sort of better than I ever will. But a lot of people find, I think, some solace in writing about their experiences, because this really does feel traumatic for people. These lives that we expected to have, these jobs we expected to have, this culture we expected to have, does not exist, or we are excluded, or it's untenable, or for lots of different reasons it's not working out. And it really does feel awful. I mean, I think I spent probably, let's see, that was 2017. I graduated in 2015, so I was 2 years out from my PhD and still trying to make sense of what had happened. Who am I now? What does this mean? Am I still a scholar? Should I bother with my scholarship? What will I do with my life now? Everything seemed very up in the air and very uncertain at that time. And so I look back on it, and I'm a little bit embarrassed about it now, but it really did feel that way. And so now I've just, I actually, after that, in 2018, I actually ended up getting a job with a very tiny college, directing a study abroad program. And that was really great until I got laid off in December because of COVID. And so I said to somebody, I said, the first time you break up with academia, it feels absolutely awful. And the second time is kind of meh, like it's just not that big of a deal anymore. So, because I've already been through lots of life transition, and it just was sort of one more life transition.
So the intensity of the emotions has become both less frequent and less intense?
Yeah, I think so. It's become, it has become part of my story, but it's not the story anymore. At the time I wrote my essay, it was the story. Those feelings were absolutely the story. And now I look back on that and I'm like, yeah, that's part of it. But I've got some other stuff going on too, and new feelings and new projects. And, life is okay. Things turned out okay.
And I noticed on your Twitter bio something I don't recall seeing before, though I'm sure it's been there for probably hundreds of people, but you put adoptee in your Twitter profile. So
yeah.
Is that rare? Because I don't recall seeing that before.
I put that there because I want people who are adopted to be able to find me. That's become an important marker of identity for me in the last, I don't know, maybe 5 years, maybe 10 years. I've started really connecting with people who have had that same experience, and there are a lot of similarities. And I talk about that experience a lot on Twitter because I think we all have this idea that that being adopted is such a great, it's so great, right? It's a win-win-win for, it's an easy solution to social problems. And then if you start thinking about it for a couple minutes, it starts getting infinitely more complex and more complicated, and has some, and these really significant problems start coming to light. So I'm pretty active on Twitter talking about that.
At what age did you learn you're an adoptee?
Ooh, always. My parents, there are a lot of parents who, my parents, you know, I could be any adopted kid in the 70s, but my parents adopted me at this point when adoptive parents were finally being told to tell as early as possible. And so my parents did that. So it was like, we always like read these like kids books, and there was a lot of kind of normalizing that experience in my family. So like there was never like a gotcha or a surprise moment. It was like just something I always knew, but I didn't start thinking about it until much later in my life, when I started searching for family and searching for some medical history and searching for the, what I felt like were these missing pieces of my life.
And how old were you when you were adopted?
I was 2 months old, so that's you know, it's not uncommon for kids to be adopted at birth. So it took me, so I was in foster care, and it's weird not knowing where you were for the first couple months of your life. That's sort of strange. And then, you know, I don't have any baby pictures from those months either. Like it's just kind of a missing, it's kind of a hole. So it's a little, yeah, it feels a little strange to not have some of those pieces still.
And I can't help but asking, what kind of relationship have you had with your adopting parents?
They're great. My dad died a couple years ago. My mom and I have a great relationship. And I often tell people, when I tell people that I've searched and I've found birth family and continue to have a relationship with them, a lot of times people will ask me, well, like, what does your mother think? And I'm like, well, you know, she's fine. Like I'm struggling, she's fine. So it's interesting how yeah, it's searching and finding. It's often, I think we see it as a rejection of parents. But I really think you can have a wonderful relationship with your adoptive parents and still want to know these things that they can't tell you.
And did you have siblings, either biological and or in your adoptive family?
Yes, I have one adopted brother and two uh, biological half brothers. So I'm wealthy in brothers.
And when did you find out who your biological parents were, and what kind of relationship have you had with them?
I was 38 years old, which seems so late, but I think that's not uncommon in the adoptee community. A lot of people, some people are still waiting until their adoptive parents die before they search because they're so afraid of hurting their feelings. And that was not my case. But I wanted to, there were just things I wanted to know. I wanted to know medical history. I wanted to see someone who looked like me, and I wanted to know kind of what their story was. So I was 38 years old, and I searched and I gathered up all this. It's a long story, but I did a lot of research, and through researching in public records, I was able to make contact.
And what happened?
It was, yeah, it's a big moment when you make contact because you don't know what the response is going to be. Is this person going to reject you? I mean, a lot of birth mothers from the 60s and 70s, they were told to never, never, never talk about their children ever again, pretend that they were dead. So you can imagine it's very shocking when someone does make contact. And so I wrote a letter and I said, based on this research I did, I think this is who you are in my life. And I have, you know, I'm happy to make contact with you in any way that you feel is appropriate. And I sent the letter, and I waited and I waited and I waited and I waited, and finally a letter came back. That was affirmative and positive and welcoming. So, yeah, we have a nice relationship. We talk every now and then.
And what about your biological father?
I never met him. I'm in contact with his family, but he was dead by the time I found him.
And your half brothers, what was it like meeting them?
Yeah,
And I assume that was at 38 too.
Yeah, they're so wonderful. It's challenging. I mean, because you have to, the ideas that even though you share biology, there's no shared history, right? Like they don't get your jokes maybe, and you don't get their jokes, and you're like, what? Oh, right, because we didn't grow up together. We grew up in different places and with different parents and different values, and it is challenging to create those kinds of relationships, but they have been so wonderful and so welcoming.
And what was the happiest year of your life?
Oh, the happiest year of my life. God, that's a good question. I don't know if I've had like one single happiest year. I don't know. I mean, I can think of like events along my life, like the PhD graduation, that was pretty big. I'm pretty happy. College graduation, that was pretty big. Yeah, getting my first apartment. It's like, so there are these events that I can really think of, but I can't think of a whole year that's been like the happiest.
Childhood, fairly unhappy, average, above average in happiness?
Oh, I think it was probably above average. I mean, it's hard to say. It was challenging in certain respects, but there was love and there was joy there too.
So I was shocked listening to a previous podcast that you'd done where you talked about you hated high school. Why did you hate high school?
Yes. Oh, I thought it was so dumb. It just seemed there was nothing about it that interested me. Absolutely nothing. It seemed kind of dumbed down, and it didn't answer any questions. I mean, I hated all my history classes. I thought they were dumb. Because it was that kind of like really bad history where you just memorize a bunch of facts and some dates, and that was boring. And then people kept telling me that I should go to high school so I could learn social skills, and I was like, what? Yeah, I don't think I don't think high school is a microcosm of the world. I just think it's bigger than that. So I ended up dropping out of high school. So I finished my sophomore year, tried to go back for my junior year, and just didn't like it any better. So yeah, I'm sort of missing 2 years of high school.
Oh, what about middle school? Did you hate middle school? 6th, 7th,
Yeah,
and 8th grade?
hated middle school as well. I think those are hard years for anybody, though. I think those are challenging, I think, for everybody.
Well, I mean, challenging, yeah, but most people, in my experience, like going to school because they get to see their friends. So, what about your friends? Did you have friends?
Yeah, I had a couple friends. I'm the kind of person who has like maybe one or two good friends, but not a huge crowd of friends. So, yeah, high school never felt like where I needed to go to see friends. And my friends were also kind of bad kids who didn't go to school. So I didn't have to go to school to see them.
Were the other kids mean to you?
I think everybody, well, I don't know if everybody goes through, but yeah, it's like there's some bullying involved, but yeah, it just didn't feel like I don't know. I was curious about a lot of things in the world, and I just didn't feel like school was the place to get those answers.
And then interesting because I mean you talk about high school is not the real world, but so many of the dynamics that play out in high school do play themselves out as you go through life, because the people who enjoy high school are usually, connected with other people, have some degree of popularity, and they learn how to work the system. All right, education educates you in how to work the system. Is that fair?
I guess that's fair. I think I don't have a lot of tolerance for systems that I don't particularly appreciate.
What led you to pursue a PhD? So I think, were you 26 when you graduated with your BA?
hmm I was 28.
28.
I was let's see, I had gone as after the high school dropout, I had worked for a couple of years at some bad jobs. I went to community college, which I'm pretty sure saved my life. It just was happening at the right time. It was a good program in a place that wasn't my hometown, and it felt like starting over, and it worked for me. It really worked for me. And community college was just it felt really safe. It felt like a safe place to be who I wanted to be. And so it was a good experience. So I graduated there with an associate's degree in veterinary technology. And then I worked for several years as a veterinary technician. And then one of the veterinarians that I worked with, he said, "Lisa, you can't keep working here." And I said, "What? What do you mean I can't keep working here? Of course I can keep working here." He said, "You need to do something with your life. You need to go to college." I was like, "What? Oh my God." I said, What would I do?" He said, "Well, based on what you like in the world, you'd probably be really good at something like English or history." And I said, "Well, where would I go?" And he said, "Well, there's a bunch of small 4-year colleges in Colorado, which is where I'm from." And so I picked one, and it turned out, yeah, I was 26 years old, and I enrolled as a sophomore at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado.
But what led you to go to graduate school? And was it at age 28 that you made that decision?
It was not. So I took more time off because this seems to be my story. I took more time off. I was a Peace Corps volunteer. I enrolled. I enrolled for 2 years, 2.5 years actually, as a Peace Corps volunteer, and I went to Guatemala. It was the first time. I was 28 years old. It was the first time I had left the country. It was terrifying, but here I was in this foreign country trying to work on these small scale development projects, and learn some Spanish in the meantime. But what I learned about Guatemala was that it has this very terrible history of civil war and an even longer history of US intervention. And it's quite a tragic story on a lot of levels. And I wanted to understand that better. I wanted to understand how that had come to be and why people in the United States didn't seem to know anything about it. So I went from my Peace Corps service. I enrolled in I applied to graduate school. I got into the University of Arizona, and I ended up with a PhD in Latin American history.
So at what age did you begin your graduate studies?
Let's see, that would have
32?
been, I think I was like 31, 32, somewhere in there. Yeah.
And then it took 8 years to complete your PhD. Is that accurate? 2015?
Yes. Yeah. Let's see. Yep. It would have taken 7 or 8. So yes, 7 or 8, because I got a master's in there somewhere, and yeah, it takes about 7. I think I did the PhD in 5. Let's see, is my chronology right? Let's see. I think I finished my master's, I think in 2009. And then I signed a piece of paper to go on to the PhD program. And then I graduated like at the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015.
Now, education is usually formal education is usually education to conform. Is that fair? How true is that? What's your experience with regard to education is a factory for producing conformism?
Well, I think it's going that way. I mean, I think as I think as we continue down certain political and economic paths, I think college really exists to train workers, not so much thinkers. And so I think that's part of the reason that, and I mean, specifically training like people for like low wage jobs. I don't think a college education means today what it did maybe 10 years ago or 20 years ago or 40 years ago. I think today there's a lot of pressure to get enough education to try and get a good job, but I think those jobs are increasingly scarce. And I also think there's also pressure to take courses that are not humanities based. So a lot of students who do that, they're kind of missing this whole critical thinking piece that you get with humanities courses. And I don't think that's an accident. A lot of students have told me like, ooh, I really wanted to major in history, but you know, my dad wanted me to major in business so I can get a job. I'm like, well, yep, here we are, training workers, not thinkers. So I think there is pressure to conform. I think school definitely has that capability.
So I'm just going to share one anecdote from my life. I trained for 3 years
Good.
to be a teacher of the Alexander technique. And in my final week of training, just 2 days before I was due to graduate, I had published a blog post where I criticized a certain approach to the Alexander technique. And as a result of that, I was denied graduation, denied my certificate because I'd broken the code. Alexander teachers
Oh
are not to
no.
criticize other Alexander technique teachers in public. And I blew up I had at the time I had good relations with all 5 of my primary teachers. So I forever destroyed those relationships. They have not been
Oh
repaired. Those are blown up.
no.
Also, pretty much everyone in the school or anyone who heard of me realized that I was someone to shun. Right.
Mm-hmm.
This is someone who speaks out of school. This is not someone who's popular. This is the person who shows you what not to do. Now, I did get the certificate 3 months later, and I didn't protest because I realized I had broken the code, and I was fine with that. But I think my story kind of exemplifies this point about conformism. I know throughout my life being educated, I would often encounter a teacher who would say, I never had a student who pushed me as much as you did. And that wasn't a good thing. They didn't like that. My grades often paid a price for it. What's your experience with educators trying to get you to conform?
Let's see. Educators trying to get me to conform. Well, I will say in junior high and high school, I would often be found listening to Pink Floyd, Another Brick in the Wall, and we don't need no education.
Yes.
We don't need no thought control. So it's yes, I have kind of long history of that. I like education when it can be creative, when it can encourage people to pursue individual inquiry. But I find as it's become, I think, more corporate, more focused on the bottom line, focused on student retention, as education gets away from the business of actually educating students, I think there is greater and greater pressure to conform, to pass students who maybe don't really pass your class. Um, yeah, to say that students have higher language levels than they do. You know, I find a lot to dislike there in formal education settings.
Like that, but that's my life experience. Did you have similar or different experiences to that?
I'm so sorry. Can you repeat that? I cut out for just a minute.
Sure. My experience with education is that the way to succeed is to get along with your teachers and to repeat back to them the things that they've taught you. So
Yes,
teachers love nothing more than to have you repeat back with, just enough variation so it makes it sound authentic. What's your experience?
I think that's I think a lot of students have been trained to do that these days, much to my great dismay. I think there is less emphasis on like you said, independent thought, less emphasis on thinking outside. God, I hate this corporate business speak. Thinking outside of the box, saying something that's maybe not what your teacher taught you. Having your own analysis about things, having your own thoughts about things. I think a lot of that is discouraged, and I think the predominant way that we evaluate students is through grades, and grades obviously don't reflect whether students are actually learning. Grades more often than not, I think, reflect what we want to hear as educators.
Right, you're getting indoctrination. I mean, there may be some genuine intellectual material, but it's overall, it seems like an indoctrination into, particularly at a university level, into a particular discipline. Is that fair?
Well, I mean, I think there's like I'm thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about sort of this move away from students as learners in higher education and towards these models of students as consumers and students as customers. And I think that model, I think, does us no favors at all, because that's a model that very much relies on students having certain relationships with instructors that are not based around what they learn. It's based on what.
Okay. Let's see if I lost you there. Okay. Hey, are you back? You there? Okay.
I have too many buttons to push. Okay.
Yep. Okay, I can hear you now.
All right. Okay, good. Something.
So I lost the last 60 seconds. So.
Oh, geez. Okay, it's my mother calling me. So let's see. I was saying about yes, students now conforming to these models of ideas of students as consumers, and what that's doing to independent thought, creative thought, educational opportunities. And I don't think that move toward, everything now is supposed to be based around free market principles. And I don't think that free market principles are really best applied to education, because I think it does create these situations where you are expected to really toe the line.
So an experience that I had with education, I noticed vaguely in elementary school, though I could not have articulated it at the time, was that every year it seemed like there was some new fad blowing through. So did you experience that?
I don't know if I experienced fads so much, but I'm thinking about, now there's a bunch of outrage on the part, at least in the US, on the conservative right, about critical race theory. Apparently this is the thing. And I think, I don't think that's a fad, and I don't think that's, I think that's not quite what people make it out to be. I mean, like, if you were to take my class, we wouldn't necessarily discuss critical race theory, but we would discuss different kinds of systems of oppression and how they work. Is that critical race theory? I don't know. Is it a fad? I don't know.
I understand. When did you develop the idea that you were going to spend your life as a professor?
That I think came with graduate school, because I don't think that I had envisioned that prior to going to graduate school. But graduate school, I mean, if you're getting a PhD in history, it's geared towards that, right? Very few people go into graduate programs in history without the idea that they want to become a professor. And you learn how to do that. and it just seemed like we were all kind of being groomed to do that. And I thought, oh, well, this is obviously the career path. This is the logical end result. Um, and then it turned out that was not the logical end result. But it seemed to start. It seemed to it became very appealing. Like, oh, like really, like, oh, I have an office and I teach these classes and I read these books and I write these articles, and I thought, oh, I thought that's a nice life, because I mean, part of the reason I went to graduate school was just to read books, um, and write about them.
And then how did you realize that that wasn't going to happen and that you were better off giving up on that dream?
Oh, it was a long it didn't occur to me all at once. It was sort of, I was on the academic job market for a couple of years, and that went precisely nowhere. Like, I would have these interviews for these colleges that I had never heard of and places that I definitely didn't want to live. And then I think I was shortlisted a few times, and that went nowhere. So it just did not seem to be going anywhere. And in the meantime, it takes, the academic hiring cycle takes a year. And in the meantime, like, what are you supposed to eat? How are you supposed to buy groceries? Like, no one tells you these things. So yeah, it became very obvious early on that I was going to have to do something else in the meantime. I mean, maybe the academic job would finally break, or maybe it wouldn't. But like, regardless of what happened, I was going to need to get some kind of a job.
Did you figure out why did some people get hired as history professors and you didn't? What separated you from those who succeeded?
Oh, I have bad feelings about this. I think there are so many good historians that have not gotten jobs, and it's easy when it's you. It's easy to fall into this. Oh my God, it's me, right? I'm not good enough to do this. My scholarship isn't good enough, and as it turns out, none of that is true. People get jobs. I've seen some very mediocre people get jobs because they are well connected, or they know people who are well connected, or they are wealthy enough to continue to go on the academic job market. And they can just do that kind of continually until they get a job. Or, maybe they have spouses who are making enough money that they can do that. I mean, there's a bunch of different reasons that people finally succeed. But if you read about academics trying to get academic jobs, it's like some people are like, oh my God, like I'm sending off my 150th job application. I'm like, oh my God, like that's amazing. And then hearing about how many applications different academic departments receive for certain jobs. I mean, 300 is not an uncommon number. So it's part of it is a numbers game. Part of it is who you know. Part of it is just dumb luck. Part of it is persistence. I mean, there are a lot of different reasons, and there are so many things you can't control. You can be absolutely the best person for the job, and you may not get it anyways. It is not regrettably, it is not a meritocracy. We would like to think it is, and it's really not. It's a combination of a lot of things that you just cannot control.
So with those PhD students who kept telling their professor, in effect, how amazing you are, I would assume that they would develop, some of them would have developed special relationships with their professor, and their professor would then take it on as a personal mission to get them hired somewhere, because then the student was going to replicate or develop upon the professor's own work. And so I would assume that's the dynamic.
That is a lot of the dynamic. So I can think of several instances that I have seen in which people have gotten jobs, maybe jobs they aren't qualified. Well, not that they're not qualified. That's the wrong way to say it. maybe, but I've seen people who are very well connected get jobs that over other people who maybe could have gotten those same jobs.
I mean, that's just the way I see the world work. In various things that I've done, it's those who develop a great relationship with their teachers, don't cause their teachers any trouble, give their teachers this impression that, you know, how thrilled you are by getting to have you as a teacher, and you want to, you know, carry on all these amazing insights that I've learned from you, and I'm so grateful to you. And then the teachers go, oh, you know, I've got a protege, I'm going to get this person hired at UCLA. I mean, that's just what I see.
Yeah. That I think is probably the way it often happens. Yeah.
Now, my mother died when I was 3, and so my father was so busy that I was essentially farmed out to foster care for about 18 months or so. And so I kept going from home to home to home in those early years. And then I think that became a pattern throughout my life, that I was always blowing up my groups that I was belonging to, always getting myself kicked out. And as I grew older, the pain didn't diminish from getting ejected from a group. It just compounded. Like, all the loss would just compound, and it was though I was being thrown around in a washing machine or a dryer. And the loss, it just kept getting, you know, more and more intense rather than diminishing. I'm wondering if childhood loss then combined with the loss of the dream of the PhD, so that you too may have experienced something like what I described.
Yes, I think that's probably a good part of my story as well. Is just that feeling, you know, early experiences, I think, of rejection really set you up um, for a lot of self-sabotage, as you described, and then also um, the expectation of future loss. So yeah, you're kind of conditioned to think about your life through these lenses of loss, and that can be very hard. And sometimes it's loss that is externally created, and sometimes it can be, I think, loss that we ourselves create. But either way, like emotionally, I think there's not a whole lot of qualitative difference between those two. I mean, loss is loss, whether you've lost parents or family, or the idea of a lifestyle that you thought you were going to have, or groups of people in your life that you thought you were going to have, or an identity. I mean, loss is loss.
When did you start to get an inkling that you were setting yourself up for rejection? Because I would get an inkling throughout my life, but it only became clear, say, the last 15 years.
Yeah, I that's a really good question, and I don't know exactly when that became clear to me. I've done a lot, done a lot of therapy, done a lot of work on that, and it's been it's now I can kind of feel it. I don't know if this happens to you, but I can kind of feel it when I'm getting self-sabotagey. Like,
Yes.
ooh, I think, ooh, I think this is gonna happen. And I'm now able to step back and go, is this really what's happening? Are you making this happen? Do you want this to happen? Is this all in your head? Like, I can kind of interrogate that feeling a little bit better. But I think when I was younger, it seemed so automatic that I wasn't aware enough of how that worked for me that I could really do anything about it. So now I know that I can feel all of those feelings and have that urge to self-sabotage and create loss in my life, but I don't have to do it.
I remember I moved to America at age 11, entered 6th grade, and shortly thereafter, the most beautiful girl in the class dropped a note on my desk asking me to be her boyfriend, and I didn't know how to handle it, and so I blew it up.
Oh,
And so
yeah.
throughout my life, I've had trouble accepting good things coming easily and naturally to me. I've had a
Hmm.
great deal of discomfort with prosperity, and I've
Yes.
had a lot of opportunities to make a lot of money, and I've always found a way to blow them up. what is your experience with prosperity, meaning good things coming easily?
Oh boy, yes. I've come to the realization in the later years of my last couple of years of my life, I guess, that I do tend to struggle with things that seem to come easily to me, because it seems like if things come easily, they're not worth very much. And so now I have I made up a mantra that I say when I feel myself not wanting to accept something that comes easily. And so I say to myself, okay, so I receive and accept and value and honor that which comes to me easily. And I know it's okay that I have this. And it's just recognizing how that works has led to a lot of self-awareness and a lot of ability to tolerate greater amounts of prosperity, greater amounts of joy, greater amounts of money, better relationships. Like my tolerance for having has gone up.
My life has been marred by a compulsive need to prove. I've always carried like a chip on my shoulder that I needed to prove something to Gavin Brown and the other boys in second grade who did not want me at Gavin Brown's birthday party. And that's like being a chip on my shoulder throughout my life. How about you? Has that played any role in your life?
Yes, I think that definitely has. I mean, part of I think what being adopted sets you up for is this idea that you have to prove that you have the right to exist. And it's such a struggle because of course we have the right to exist just as people, as humans. Like it's an inalienable right, I think. But being adopted is oftentimes trying to prove that we were good enough, trying to prove that we were good enough to be kept, that we were good enough that we didn't have to be relinquished. And it really sets up this idea of having, I mean, I know it's not uncommon for adopted people, and I'm assuming as well fostered people who are fostered as children to be massive overachievers, because we are just trying to prove that we really are good enough to be on the planet with everybody else. And that kind of thinking, I think, can be very, I mean, it can take you to great heights and it can help you achieve great things, but it doesn't necessarily come from a very healthy place.
What would you say to your 16-year-old self who didn't want to go to high school anymore? What would you say now back to that 16-year-old girl?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I would tell her, it's going to be okay. Like it was not clear that things were going to be okay in that moment. I think I would tell her that it's okay not to be like everybody else. And it's okay to be a little bit different than everybody else and to do things in your own way. Because one of my personal patterns has been to do things in my own way. I like to, for example, let's see, what's an example? Oh, yeah, one of the great pleasures of my adult life is going on road trips by myself. I just love jumping in the car and driving somewhere. And a friend of mine said to me, God, that's such a quirky and funny thing you do. And I said, really? Like, it never occurred to me that was weird. She said, you make your own roads. And I think I do. I think I'm very much invested in creating paths for myself that feel congruent with who I am. Like other people's roads don't usually work for me. And I think at the time when I was 16, I didn't know that. I thought I had to be on everybody else's road, but I don't have to be on anybody else's road but mine.
Sorry, that's a sound problem on my end, but got it fixed.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's okay. Do you need me to repeat?
Nope. I think I got it. So what would you say to your 32-year-old self who was considering going to graduate school and then developed a vision of becoming a university professor? So it's a little more than a decade later now. You've got wisdom. What would you say to your 32-year-old self who's thinking about going to graduate school and thinking about devoting and developing a life in academia?
I think my advice would be so much the same. I think I would say to myself that other people, that other people's roads don't usually work for you very well. So this one seems like you want this road, and it seems like this is the right road, but consider the possibility that this is not the only road.
Let me read a little bit from this Stephen Turner essay, Beyond the Academic Ethic, and get your reaction. Here's just one sentence. The basic fact of intellectual life is that it does not pay for itself. What do you think?
Ooh, let's see. The basic fact of intellectual life is that it doesn't pay for itself. Is he talking materially, as in having that life of the mind is often an expensive proposition?
He's talking financially. He's saying that if you want to be an intellectual, your odds of being able to pay for the intellectual life, getting paid for your thinking is quite slim.
It's quite slim. Everybody I know is in terrible student debt, and that's awful. But I think that's consistent with our switch to rethinking the university as the site of free market capitalism. Tuition is going through the roof, which we know, and I don't think that's going to stop. And I think eventually I was telling somebody this the other day. My dystopic prediction is that university education is eventually, it's going to be exclusively for people who can afford it. So it's only going to be available for a very small number of the population. Like those people maybe are going to get a decent education. Everybody else is going to get maybe like remediation or just education that's not meaningful and isn't actually education. But they'll pay for it, right? Because we have to keep those wheels turning. So I think he's right in that, to have the privilege of being an intellectual, of being able to devote yourself to your writing and your thinking and your scholarship, it costs money. I mean, there is absolute cost to that, and most people cannot afford to do it for free. People ask me sometimes to do to write certain things for free or to do certain types of labor for free, and I really have to think about whether I want to accept those proposals, because I have to work to make money. And I have to think about whether or not, what kinds of free labor I really want to do and what kinds of labor I don't want to give away for free.
Now, smart people often get told when they're growing up, at least I often was told, do what you love and the money will follow. On the other hand, there's the opposite advice that real artists have day jobs. Which perspective do you think is more wise?
Let's see. I think I came down on the day job for a long time. I mean, I've worked some really weird jobs. One of my weird jobs after graduate school, I worked temp jobs. So I've been meaning to write an essay about the day I walked into a temp agency and I was like, hello, I have a PhD and I need a job. And they were just absolutely dumbfounded. Like they just didn't even know what to do, because they just thought, well, you have a PhD. Aren't you gainfully employed somewhere? And I thought, nope, that's the problem, is that I have a PhD and I am not gainfully employed somewhere. So I did temp jobs, and mostly it's mindless data entry. I did that. And then the other job that I knew was not my heart job, it was not what I loved, but it was okay for the moment, was that I worked in crime victim advocacy. So I was, and they hired me for this job, even though I had a PhD, because I had been a Peace Corps volunteer. So I had some service experience. And then also I spoke Spanish fluently, and they needed that. So I was going out on crime scenes with law enforcement to inform victims of their rights, and answer questions and talk to them about their next steps, usually on what was the worst day of their lives. And so I did those things, and those things allowed me to buy groceries, which was important, and pay rent, and then also do some of my own writing in the meantime.
Now, what about other people you went to graduate school with who perhaps became professors? Did that place any strain on friendships?
I think choosing my own path has put me in a place, like a different emotional place than oftentimes my friends were. Like, I don't have a job where I have to put out a certain amount of scholarship to get tenure. Like, that's just not a part of my world. So sometimes it puts you in these strange places emotionally. You're just in different places, and it's okay. There's nothing bad about it. But I've been amazed at the number of people in my life who are academics, and every time I do some weird non-academic thing, like, they're cheering me on. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to start my own business. And people were like, that's great, fantastic. Let us know how it goes. How can we help?
Let me read a little bit more here from Stephen Turner. He says, academic life is selective, and the grounds for advancement at each stage are not clear, except for degree requirements. And depending on the system and the point in history, many are called who are not chosen. So the question of what sort of calling academic life has become is also a question about the calling of those who fall by the wayside. This has recently become a hot topic as a result of an op-ed by a historian who was giving up on academia after having failed, despite some short-term contracts, to gain a tenure-track job. She writes that giving up on something that you thought was your life's calling hurts like hell. When you experience rejection from the entire institution of academia after devoting years of your life and thousands of dollars to becoming an academic, betrayal and rage sometimes become your only emotions for a good long while. This comment has gone viral, and there are dozens of sites devoted to leaving academia. They tell a bitter story about the myth of academic life and its seductions. One website describes its orientation as reflecting a belief that the current system is flawed, cruel, unsustainable, and impossible to directly engage with. In this view, PhD programs with their false promises lure students to serve as cheap labor, first as teaching assistants, then as poorly paid adjuncts when tenure-track jobs elude them. Many of the comments and contributions reflect the fact that the education that the injured academics have received is highly specialized. To leave academia is to face the impossible task of repackaging their achievements as marketable skills. Any thoughts on any of that?
Oh, yeah, that's a that's a lot. I mean, labor exploitation in academia is an absolute fact, and I think it does have to do with our shift towards these free market models of what education should look like. So, we do need, like, universities do need graduate students to do unpaid labor, and I mean, above that, I mean, there's adjuncts, and then there's early career researchers, and there's blah blah. I mean, so it's this whole hierarchy of exploitative labor. And I don't know that we can get away necessarily from labor exploitation. We try and minimize it where we can, but at a certain point, we're all selling our labor. But I have to say, I'm a little happier selling my labor for money than lines on my CV. So there's that. And then I also, what was the other thing I was thinking of? Oh, I did write something about whether academia was a calling. And do we think about, what makes it a calling as opposed to a job? Because ultimately, is it not just a job? I mean, hopefully in life you find employment that you love and makes you feel fulfilled and happy. But, there are a lot of people working jobs in life who don't love their jobs. So, is this not just jobs? I mean, what is it about academia that makes it seem like a calling? And why do we feel called? So I think there's a lot probably to unpack there that I'm still thinking about.
What was it like to go viral? I assume that this began as a post on your website, giving up on
Yes.
academia.
Yes, it's actually it is a post on my website. It was weird. I mean, I think I tweeted it probably, and then it got retweeted a little bit, and then overnight 15,000 people read it. And I went, "Oh my God, like that's that's really crazy." But clearly it had struck a nerve with people. People obviously responded to it, and it expressed something that I think resonated with a lot of people who were feeling the same, and they couldn't figure out how to articulate it. Academics hate talking about feelings, and here I was saying that leaving academia actually created grief for people, and created a certain loss of identity that people had to grieve.
What what did you get from the PhD? Like, what skills, what benefits just inherent in the process of doing a doctorate?
Yeah, it's so interesting, because what's always gotten me jobs has been my non-academic skills. Like, so my academic skills clearly are not getting me jobs. Um, but what I did learn, um, I'm a good researcher. I learned how to do research. I actually really enjoy being a historian. I enjoy historical research. I enjoy thinking about how things are different in the past and why. I like to write. I've learned my writing got much better, so that was a real plus. Um, let's see, and I think you do get tangible skills out of it. I mean, trying to manage a project as big as a dissertation is you have to figure out how to do that. But also things like softer skills, right? Like networking. How do you make friends with this group of people who you aren't necessarily friends with, and hopefully you're going to get in good with them, and hopefully they're going to help your career. Like, I mean, that's what academics do. Um, so you learn how to do things like that. Yeah, how to read strategically. And I think you get to learn a little bit about a lot of different things.
I remember when I was at UCLA, there was a fellow student who offered me something like $200 to write a paper for him, and I was momentarily tempted, and
Yeah.
then said no. But have you written papers for people? Has it been lucrative if you've done so?
No, I do not write for people, because I think they need to do that. And I have edited for people. Most of my editing is with faculty members, with early career researchers, and a lot of those people are they're writing in English as a second language, and so they do need help to articulate things in English that only maybe a native speaker um, could help with. Spanish is my second language, and I can write in Spanish, but I'm very, very slow at it, and I always need someone to check my work. So I know that faculty members trying to write in English are also struggling, if it's not their native language. So those people, I think, really do need editing services, but I don't write for people at all.
What's the line between editing and writing? And surely you've experienced pushing up against that liminal space.
Yep, I think the difference, at least for me, the difference is to not do violence to people's ideas. Sometimes I read something and I'm like, wow, that is not the conclusion I would have drawn, or yeah, I disagree with this, or it's not something that I would want to put out in the world. But they're not my ideas either. They belong to the owner of them, and my job to make um, it's not my job to do violence to their ideas. So, and also, I really think when you are correcting people's writing, it is important that they sound like them in writing, and not that they sound like whoever is doing the correction. Like, I think you really have to think about what are people's natural writing rhythms? What are the words they use? How do they construct sentences? And I think make corrections that make the sentences easier to read, but yet really reflect the writer. Because it doesn't matter if people sound like me in writing, they shouldn't. it matters if they sound like them in writing.
So you've developed a business. If you go to your website, lisamunro.net, it says, I help academic writers build sustainable and joyful writing practices in collaborative spaces. Please tell me more about your business.
Yes, so that's been developing over the last couple of years, and that's where I've landed with it. I wasn't quite sure how I was going to make a business out of what I knew and what I like to do, but it's turned out to be my superpower is really providing academics spaces to help them get writing done. So I do writing workshops, I do writing retreats, I teach courses, I do some writing, I do writing support for people. People call me up and talk to me about their writing. So I've become involved in how people get their writing done. Not so much in like what they say, which would be more editing, but